In the presentation I showed you, or I talked a little bit about the 2012 presidential election, and this just gives you a sense of what it looks like from a visual perspective. And obviously, not being in class, it's a little bit harder to do some of the links that I might otherwise show you. So I prepared this short YouTube video just to kind of walk you through a little bit so you can see visually what happened in 2012. One thing to note is that this website denotes the Democratic candidates in red and the Republican candidates in blue, which is the opposite of what you're normally used to seeing on the screen on election night. So the first thing to note is obviously that President Barack Obama won re-election. He won 51% of the popular vote to Governor Romney's 47% of the popular vote. So again, 65.9 million votes for the Democratic ticket versus 60.9 million votes for the Republican ticket. So relatively close in terms of the popular vote. Where things tend to diverge is with the Electoral College. So you see again, there's about a 4 percentage point difference in the popular vote, but look at the huge gap in the electoral vote. So President Obama won re-election with 332 electoral votes compared with 206 electoral votes for the Romney-Ryan ticket. You see third-party candidates, Gary Johnson, Jill Stein, both of whom are actually running again in 2016, combined picked up about 1.3% of the vote, but no electoral votes, and that kind of brings us back to Duverger's law in the sense that third-party candidates tend not to have very high success rates. So to look at it a little bit differently here, here shows you the map of the 2012 presidential race. So in our home state of Texas, you see that our 38 electoral votes easily went for Mitt Romney, 57% of the vote, to President Obama's 41% of the vote. No question there. So Governor Romney racks up an overwhelming victory here and picks up all the electoral votes. And the reason why this matters is that the national popular vote is not what matters. It's about getting to 270 electoral votes. And this map looks almost identical to the map from 2012 with two exceptions. One here is Indiana, that President Obama narrowly carried in 2008, but Governor Romney won fairly comfortably in 2012. And then North Carolina, where Governor Romney also flipped the state and he won 50.4% of the vote to President Obama's 48% of the vote. Otherwise, the map looked identical to what you saw in 2008. The election contest was, again, not necessarily decided on a nationwide election. So again, you see Texas, not particularly close election. Same thing out in California. Because these were such blowouts, the candidates don't spend a lot of time campaigning in those states. Instead, they spent an awful lot of time here in New Hampshire, where the president won re-election with 52% of the vote. Virginia, again, where the president won 51% of the vote. North Carolina, where the president lost, but again, a relatively close state. You head down here to Florida, again, another state that President Obama won barely by less than 1 percentage point. And then again, you swing out to the Midwest. And again, you see here in Ohio where the president narrowly edged out Governor Romney. In Iowa, again, another narrow edge for the president. Wisconsin, another narrow edge. And then you swing out to the West. You swing out to Nevada, another state that Governor Romney competed in but lost a relatively close race. Colorado is another example of that. So what you see in modern presidential elections is not really a national campaign so much as campaigns are targeting these so-called battleground states, the states that are relatively close. And pretty much all the states that I just showed you are likely to be closely contested elections in 2016 as well. And the candidates, they're not going to come to Texas. They are not going to go to California because these states don't really matter. Despite what you may have read about in the press, Texas is not going to vote Democratic in 2016. It's simply not going to happen. Although you might take that with a grain of salt, since I had told students there was no way that Donald Trump would win the Republican nomination. But setting that aside for right now. So again, the presidential election is not likely to be seen very much in Texas outside of what you see on the news. Again, if you live in Florida, you're going to get awfully tired of it. If you live in Iowa, you're going to get awfully tired of it. If you live in New Hampshire, you're going to get awfully tired of it. Now, there's some chance that maybe some new states will pop up, maybe Pennsylvania, right? A state, again, you see that President Obama won 52-47, question whether or not Mr. Trump can put that state in play against Mrs. Clinton. Mrs. Clinton is certainly hoping that maybe Georgia is a state where she might be able to play and reverse Governor Romney's advantage. Arizona is another state that Mrs. Clinton's campaign is hoping maybe that they can make competitive against Mr. Trump. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But when you look at presidential elections, it's all about accumulating electoral votes. These numbers here on the screen tell you the number of electoral votes in each state, and the magic number is 270. There's 538 votes in the Electoral College. You have to get 50% plus 1. That means 270. That's the bottom line. That's what gets you elected to the presidency. And again, one of the things to keep a close eye on in the 2016 presidential election are some of the fundamentals. Is there economic growth in the United States? The popularity of President Obama. Both Mrs. Clinton and Mr. Trump do have some challenges with the voters. Mr. Trump has highly unfavorable numbers. Mrs. Clinton has some pretty good unfavorable numbers of her own. While she has a trust issue with the voters, Mr. Trump seems to be turning off as many demographic groups as he can. So it's going to be a fascinating race. And again, some of the polling has suggested that third-party candidates could swing this race. Probably unlikely when push comes to shove. My expectation is that a lot of the partisans will kind of return to their natural parties as the race kind of crystallizes in September and October. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. Small margins, and it's something to go back to your presentation on campaigns and elections. Small margins, 1 or 2 points in a couple states, could move this presidential election maybe in a way that we don't necessarily anticipate.